Nobody saw this coming. The cameras were rolling, the crowd was waiting, and in the middle of the brightest lights of the French Open, Aryna Sabalenka, one of the fiercest competitors on the WTA Tour, made a decision that sent shockwaves through the tennis world. Fans, commentators, and fellow players all paused, trying to understand what had just happened. The WTA released a brief statement acknowledging her absence, urging players to adhere to press obligations, while the media speculated endlessly. Had Sabalenka gone off on the organization? Was this a rebellion? Was she being silenced? Headlines and social feeds buzzed with debates, opinions, and conflicting narratives, fueling a storm that no athlete ever wants to face. Sabalenka, known for her power, precision, and no-nonsense attitude on court, had chosen not to attend a post-match press conference. At first glance, it seemed like a simple act of avoidance. But the reality was far more complex, far more human. She didn't feel safe. She didn't feel understood. And for a moment, the pressures of being a top athlete, a public figure, and a representative of her country collided in a way that no one had fully acknowledged until that moment. It all started after a grueling match, one of those battles that pushes every player to their limits. Sabalenka had played with her characteristic intensity, swinging her racket with a kind of ferocity that had won her dozens of matches and titles. Yet, as she walked off the court, the reality of the expectations and scrutiny she carries hit her like a tidal wave. The WTA, the governing body of women's tennis, had its protocols, its press obligations, and its questions. Questions about matches, about rankings, about sponsors. But also questions that strayed into uncomfortable territories: politics, nationality, affiliations. And Aryna, like any human being, felt cornered. She felt silenced by a system that expected her to always perform, always comment, always comply. The pressure of that expectation can be suffocating, especially when your words, or even your silence, are under a microscope that millions are watching. She later explained, "I should be able to feel safe when I do interviews with the journalists after my matches. For my own mental health and well-being, I have decided to take myself out of this situation today." It was a statement that shocked many, not because it was confrontational, but because it was honest. It exposed a reality that is rarely discussed in professional sports. Athletes are human, and sometimes the spotlight can be more of a burden than a reward. Sabalenka wasn't rebelling for the sake of drama. She wasn't making a political statement in the traditional sense. She was asserting her right to protect herself, to acknowledge the psychological and emotional demands placed upon her, demands that often go unseen. This wasn't the first time she had faced such pressure. Throughout her career, Sabalenka has navigated the intense expectations of representing Belarus, of being a top player on the global stage, and of constantly defending her position in the WTA rankings. Every match, every point, every misstep or triumph is scrutinized. The margin for error is microscopic, and the moment she chose to step back, the narrative began to twist. Social media erupted. Critics questioned her professionalism, her commitment, her resilience. Headlines suggested that she was challenging the WTA, that she was going off on the organization itself. Commentators debated her every move, fueling speculation that the absence was a sign of rebellion rather than self-preservation. But in reality, what she was doing was far more subtle and powerful. She was claiming agency over her own mental space, an assertion that many athletes struggle to make publicly. People often forget that behind the power serves and explosive forehands, there is a human being, someone who experiences fear, doubt, and vulnerability. Sabalenka's withdrawal from the press conference highlighted this human side in a way that the tennis world isn't always prepared to handle. You know that I really respect all of you, and I'm always open. You can ask whatever you want, you will get all the information, but in the last press conference, I felt like my press conference became a political TV show, and I'm not an expert in politics. I'm just a tennis player," she said, her voice steady but charged with emotion. This was not a defiance of authority. It was a plea for understanding, a call for recognition that athletes should be more than instruments of spectacle. The story of Sabalenka's courage to step away in that moment cannot be separated from the broader pressures that athletes face today. There is an expectation to perform, to be composed, to answer questions intelligently and diplomatically, and to maintain an image that aligns with sponsors and fan expectations. Deviate, and the backlash can be swift and harsh. But Sabalenka's decision illuminated a truth often overlooked. Protecting one's mental health is not weakness, it is resilience, it is strength. It is, in its own way, a rebellion against a system that sometimes prioritizes public consumption over human well-being. As reports and commentary rolled in, it became clear that this was a turning point not just for Sabalenka, but for the conversation surrounding athlete mental health in tennis. "I know that I have to provide answers to the media on things not related to my tennis or my matches, but on Wednesday I did not feel safe in my press conference," she explained, providing clarity to those who wondered whether her absence was a sign of disregard or disrespect. It was neither. It was an assertion of her boundaries, a necessary step for her to maintain her focus and preserve her ability to compete at the highest level. The WTA, while following protocol, had to adapt to this reality. Policies and expectations that had been rigid were now being examined under a new light. What does it mean for an athlete to feel pressured? How can the organization ensure that players are supported, not just monitored? Sabalenka's action prompted conversations within the sport that were long overdue. Her withdrawal from the press conference was more than an isolated incident. It was a catalyst for discussion, a moment that forced the WTA and the global tennis community to confront the mental and emotional demands placed upon its players. To understand the depth of this moment, one must consider Sabalenka's career trajectory. She has been one of the most dominant forces on the WTA Tour, consistently reaching the latter stages of Grand Slam tournaments, and her game is characterized by a level of intensity and power that few can match. Yet, beneath the surface, there is a constant negotiation between expectation and personal well-being. Every swing, every match, every interaction carries the weight of judgment from fans, media, and peers alike. And for someone as fiercely competitive as Sabalenka, to admit discomfort or to step back publicly is an act that takes as much courage as any championship victory. Critics argued that her withdrawal undermined the authority of the WTA, that it challenged the notion of professionalism in sports. But in reality, it highlighted a fundamental issue that transcends tennis: the human cost of high-level athletic competition. Sabalenka's choice was not about confrontation, it was about survival. It was about maintaining the mental and emotional stability required to continue competing at an elite level. "I should be able to feel safe when I do interviews with the journalists after my matches," she said again, reinforcing the central point. Safety and mental health are prerequisites for performance, not optional luxuries. This incident also shed light on the broader cultural expectations placed on athletes. Women in sports, in particular, often face an additional layer of scrutiny. Their emotions, expressions, and decisions are dissected in ways that male athletes rarely experience. Sabalenka's decision to assert control over her interactions with the press was, therefore, not just a personal choice, but a statement about the autonomy of female athletes to navigate their own professional environments without being judged or punished for prioritizing mental health. The narrative that emerged from this moment was multifaceted. On one hand, there was the public spectacle, the media, the fans, the commentators. On the other hand, there was the personal reality, a world-class athlete confronting the cumulative pressures of career, expectation, nationality, and personal boundaries. In stepping away, Sabalenka invited a conversation about respect, empathy, and the sometimes invisible toll of professional sports. It was a reminder that behind every headline, there is a human story, complex and nuanced, often invisible to those who only see the result on the scoreboard. Her decision resonated with many across the sporting world. Fellow athletes expressed solidarity, acknowledging the bravery required to take a stand for mental health in such a public arena. Social media discussions ranged from criticism to admiration. But one thing was clear: Sabalenka's action sparked a dialogue that had been simmering for years. Athletes are more than their performances. They are human beings with limits, emotions, and the right to assert their needs. In interviews following the incident, Sabalenka continued to express her perspective with clarity and sincerity. "You know that I really respect all of you, and I'm always open," she reiterated, emphasizing that her withdrawal was not a rejection of accountability or communication, but a protective measure for her own well-being. This nuanced position, balancing openness with self-care, is what makes the situation so compelling and instructive for anyone following professional sports. The aftermath of the event also highlighted the evolving understanding of mental health within the WTA. Policies, discussions, and awareness campaigns began to focus not only on performance and physical conditioning, but also on psychological resilience and support systems. Sabalenka's experience became a case study, a teaching moment, and a catalyst for change. It demonstrated that even the most successful athletes can face moments where the pressure becomes too much, and that acknowledging this reality is both courageous and necessary. Sabalenka's stance also served as a powerful counter-narrative to the traditional image of the invincible champion. Athletes are often portrayed as machines, flawless and untouchable, expected to absorb pressure and always deliver. By stepping back and speaking her truth, Sabalenka redefined what strength looks like in professional sports. It's not just about winning titles or breaking records. It's about recognizing one's limits, asserting boundaries, and maintaining the mental and emotional health that allows an athlete to continue competing at the highest level. For fans, commentators, and aspiring athletes, this moment offered lessons far beyond the tennis court. It reminded everyone that vulnerability is not weakness, that stepping away can sometimes be the strongest statement an athlete can make, and that mental health is inseparable from performance. Sabalenka's experience underscored the importance of empathy, understanding, and support, both from the governing bodies and from the public. In the weeks following the incident, Sabalenka returned to competition with renewed focus and determination. She engaged with the media on her terms, setting boundaries that allowed her to perform while maintaining her well-being. The dialogue initiated by her actions continued, influencing policies, commentary, and the broader perception of athlete mental health. The narrative had shifted. What was initially perceived by some as defiance or controversy became a story of resilience, agency, and the courage to prioritize self-care in a world that often demands constant exposure and compliance. Aryna Sabalenka's decision that day was more than a moment of absence from a press conference. It was a statement, a catalyst, and a revelation. It highlighted the unseen pressures of elite sports, the human side of competition, and the need for systemic awareness and support. It reminded everyone watching that behind every champion is a person, and that respecting that person is as critical as celebrating their victories. As the tennis world moves forward, the echoes of that moment remain. Sabalenka's courage to speak up, or to step back when speaking was unsafe, has opened doors for dialogue, reflection, and change. Her story challenges traditional notions of professionalism, strength, and success, redefining what it means to be a champion in a sport that demands both physical excellence and emotional fortitude. Nobody saw this coming, and yet, in hindsight, it seems inevitable. The greatest victories are not always measured in titles or rankings, but in the courage to assert one's humanity in the face of immense pressure. And Aryna Sabalenka, in that moment of vulnerability, showed the world that being human is the ultimate act of strength. Word count 2001.